Welcome to episode 17 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Binns, and today I'm so excited for this episode because we're talking about all the fights going down this weekend at UFC 311, the main event between Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan, the rematch, obviously, and of course, the other huge fights that we have on the card. So let's just get straight into all of these predictions, my analysis, and what I think is going to go down this weekend. This is a really big card, so just let's go. I'm hyped. Also, I just wanted to mention very, very quickly that if you are not subscribed, please subscribe. About 94% of the people watching these videos in the short form content are not yet part of the family. Come join the Backseat Fighter Podcast community. This is where we grow MMA healthily. We talk about things that actually matter. We're not just here saying things for views and likes. And maybe I should be, but just come join, subscribe, and yeah, let's just get straight back to the episode. So talking about UFC 311, I mean, this is a banger of a pay-per-view to open up the slate in 2025. Obviously, we had the fight night last weekend, but this is the real first big event of the year happening in Los Angeles at the Intuit Dome. All our thoughts and prayers for the Backseat Fighter Podcast and Backseat Media go out to the people in LA and especially in Pasadena and all the affected areas. So hopefully there's no issues, of course, for those people. Our thoughts are with them. And hopefully it doesn't even affect this UFC 311 fight so far. It hasn't done so. But let me talk about the main event. Let's get it started right away. Islam Makhachev obviously coming off that win against Dustin Poirier in the World Championship fight. I think it was a 4th round finish with the submission. And, you know, a lot of people didn't think it would be that competitive, right? And if you really look at Islam Makhachev, he's had some amazing fights, and a lot of people expected him to just dominate Dustin Poirier, get him out of there very early on. But Dustin Poirier showed that he's still got a lot left in the tank, even though he's only going to have one more fight. But obviously he gets the finish and cements himself yet again at the top of this lightweight division, often considered the best division inside the UFC, historically anyway. But let me actually go talk about Arman Tsarukyan very, very quickly. This is a guy who obviously came off that win most recently against Charles do Bronx Oliveira. Some people found it controversial, the decision. I didn't, and I'm saying that as a huge Charles Oliveira fan. I thought Arman Tsarukyan won the 2nd and the 3rd round. Now, obviously, was it competitive? Was it a lot of control time going into the equation? You know, did Charles Oliveira have some threatening submission attempts? Of course. But in the end, Arman Tsarukyan able to get that fight, in my opinion. I just think he showed a lot of things in that most recent fight, showed his progression, not only in the cardio, showed his composure, his ability to get out of that Darce choke very, very early on. It was scary for him. But even he had his shorts coming all the way almost off, and it was able to escape that choke and showed immense, composure and ability to stay in the moment, stay present and fight through that position. Something that, you know, a champion is made of at the end of the day. And obviously he showed off a little bit of that flexibility that he's so famous for, throwing that axe kick. If you get a screenshot of that, and I'll try, his foot is literally vertical in the air and he's able to bring it down on top of Charles Oliveira's head. And those are the type of tools that he possesses on the feet. But let me talk a little bit about, you know, that fight he had against Giagos. Obviously, he was able to drop him with the left hook. That was pretty much earlier in his UFC career. Obviously fought Makhachev the first time round, which we'll get to that fight in a second. And then obviously went on and had another fight and then fought Giagos and dropped him with the left hook, finishes him with the TKO. Actually, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to talk about the first fight these guys have had. So obviously this is a rematch. And in that first fight, it was Arman Tsarukyan's debut. He was only 22 years old at the time. Islam Makhachev was, you know, relatively established in the UFC, also working his way up into the rankings, working his way up to that championship opportunity that he finally got at the end of the day against Charles Oliveira. But, you know, at this point, Islam was 27 years old and this was a short notice fight for Arman Tsarukyan, right? And what an absolute amazing fight this was. You know, if you look at that fight, excuse me, Arman Tsarukyan comes out, they're in the kickboxing range at the very beginning. He throws a spinning attack or he throws a spinning kick. They reset to that range. He throws another shot and I think he tries to go for a spinning elbow, something to that effect, actually stumbles over and Islam Makhachev crashes the space, goes for the takedown and pushes him up against the fence. And in that very moment, in that very first 30 seconds of that very first fight, we see that Arman Tsarukyan, even on short notice, has the ability to stuff the takedown and actually, you know, compete on the grappling side of things when it comes to Islam Makhachev. Now he reverses that position and he sticks Islam Makhachev up against the cage. You know, and at that point, we start seeing, you know, the high IQ level of both of these fighters. We see them in the clinch kind of move towards the center of the octagon. Islam Makhachev, I mean, the IQ this guy has had since the very first day. He goes for an inside trip that absolutely flips Arman Tsarukyan on the back. And that's just the immense IQ that he has, because he trips him and lands straight into the mount and starts going for, you know, submission, starts trying to land damage. Arman Tsarukyan, beautiful butterfly guard to eventually get him off. And, you know, I think it's Arman Tsarukyan goes for a guillotine and then, Islam Makhachev goes for a guillotine and Arman goes for one himself. And you just start seeing this 50-50 battle that these guys are having on the ground. And before I get to another part of that fight I want to talk about, when I talk about Islam Makhachev's high IQ that he's developed and how it was already so obvious in his early UFC career, that comes from his background. If you listen to the Mighty Cast, Demetrius Johnson's podcast, he just did one with Islam Makhachev. Go check that out if you haven't yet. Islam Makhachev is talking about his background in martial arts. He did literally everything: taekwondo, combat sambo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, all of these things. His base is so built for mixed martial arts. His experience, his training, his upbringing just makes him one of the most well-rounded fighters we've ever seen, especially from that region. You know, Khabib, obviously probably one of the greatest lightweights ever, maybe the greatest lightweight ever, was so dominant, maybe even a little bit more dominant in terms of the fashion of his fights, but he didn't have the well-rounded skill set that Islam Makhachev has. And that just comes from, you know, his beginnings in combat sambo, his beginnings in taekwondo and all of these other things. But let me go back to that fight. Then you see Arman Tsarukyan go for a high crotch takedown. And at one point, he's literally tipped Islam Makhachev all the way up vertical. And Islam is able to post on that right hand, somehow stay balanced and not get taken down. This is really important because at this moment, at this point in the fight in the UFC history, Islam Makhachev was yet to be taken down. So for somebody to threaten him like this is absolutely incredible. But that just shows the ability, mobility, and balance and strength of Islam Makhachev. Arman eventually does get a takedown, and you know, the guy is just the fact that when he gets a takedown, it takes him about 30 seconds to do so. Islam Makhachev fights every single part of that position, and you know, he was actually in that moment the first person, as I said, to take Islam Makhachev down. You know, this is where I think about you know, Islam Makhachev in terms of development, especially going into this fight this weekend. You know, he comes out in round 2. He throws, Islam Makhachev is a southpaw. So he's in his stance. He throws the straight left. So that's his backhand. And from that backhand, throws the switch kick with it, kind of like we've seen with, you know, someone like Leon Edwards or Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier too. Throws it, throws the high kick behind it, catches Arman Tsarukyan. Now, it doesn't necessarily knock him out, but that establishment of that kickboxing range comes from the fact that these two are so closely matched on the ground. At least they were at that point. So then the fight changes, right? The distance changes. We're no longer looking to, you know, be in a specific range for grappling. We're actually looking to stay in the kickboxing range because it's harder to take people down when you're further away. Obviously, you have to shoot further. And Islam Makhachev definitely, in my opinion, at that time, and maybe even now, has the advantage when it comes to the kickboxing range and, you know, just the overall more threatening guy in that phase of things. So now when they clash together, I think there's one point, and I'll put the screenshots up again, they come together, either both throw a right hand or they both throw their backhand, they come together. And that often happens if people are in opposite stances. You know, they come together on the exit. Arman Tsarukyan is able to turn Islam Makhachev, throws an absolutely vicious right hand off the exit of the clinch, which is something that he's very, very good at. But when you look at these guys in the clinch as well as the grappling, they're so 50-50. And going into that round 3 is when you started to see the effects of Arman Tsarukyan only getting that fight on short notice, right? He gets a little bit more tired. You see the body kicks coming in for Islam Makhachev. You see the knees in the clinch. And eventually, you know, I think just like with a lot of these guys from Dagestan, from that Khabib camp, from that Abdul Manap camp, they know when you're tired. They know how to break you. And I think he sensed that Arman was finally a bit tired, gets him up against the cage, goes for the takedown, and kind of just ends the rest of that third round on top. Now, on the judges' scorecards, Islam Makhachev got a 30-27, another 30-27, and a 28-27. So it was a unanimous decision. Every judge had him winning that fight. But at the same time, if you really go and look at that fight, it's such a close fight. Every single position was competitive. Every single exchange on the feet had both guys landing or both guys threatening to do big damage. I think at that time, the 3 weeks notice was a big factor. And, these are the small margins that we talk about. You need a lot of time to prepare, especially for someone like Islam Makhachev. Could you imagine anybody these days fighting Islam Makhachev on 3 weeks notice? Oh, wait, Volkanovski on like 2 days notice. But you see what happened, right? You need time to prepare for this guy, especially considering if I think about it, right? The development that Islam Makhachev has made when it comes to his martial arts, when it comes to his fighting style, this guy has developed so well on the feet. Even at that time, you already had a lot better striking than maybe we had seen from someone like Khabib. But then you look at him in that Charles Oliveira fight, absolutely devastating left hook or right hook, sorry. Right now, I can't remember because it's opposite to the way I would stand, but drops Charles Oliveira, lands that arm triangle and absolutely chokes him out in no time. His squeeze, his athleticism are immense, but it's his fight IQ. If you look at Izzy Adesanya and Robert Whittaker's sit-down episode, it's great that those two are doing it together and kind of training together now and put their rivalry behind. But those two were speaking about it, right? Islam Makhachev doesn't have the fanciest striking you've ever seen, but it's precise, it's accurate, it's basic, it's all the good fundamental things you need to be an absolute beast on the feet. And obviously has that brutal finishing power, especially if he rocks you. He's not going to necessarily start ground and pounding you. He's going to hit you, sting you, disorientate you, follow you down to the ground and absolutely choke you out like he did to Charles Oliveira in their championship fight. So, I think if you look at that Dustin Poirier fight and you look at how he was able to land against DP, for me, that's where this fight is going to be won. Their grappling is going to be very closely matched. Do I think one of them could win on the grappling exchange? Of course. They're so high level. But to catch Islam Makhachev in a submission is going to be very difficult, right? But it's also going to be very difficult to keep wrestling at a 5-round fight. Remember, the first fight was 3 rounds. In a 5-round championship fight, it's going to be near impossible to grapple for all 5 rounds, right? So I think we might see an absolute slugfest on the feet. And if you're asking me, I know Arman Tsarukyan has incredible power on the feet, good flexibility, amazing kicks. I like the way he stands up on the feet. He keeps his right hand very close to his cheek and his left arm very far out. And he's always controlling that range, always kind of blinding you with his lead hand. And I think it's going to be something we're going to see here again. But for me, Islam Makhachev is going to win this fight. And I think he's going to win it in that kickboxing range, in the stand-up. And that's where the difference is going to be made. But you guys let me know what you think. I'm taking Islam Makhachev this weekend. But obviously, knowing how the first fight went, knowing how good Arman Tsarukyan is, you never know what is going to happen, especially in the UFC. But let me move on now to the co-main event of the evening. This is a very, very interesting fight. Umar Nurmagamedov versus Merab Devalishvilli. Obviously, Merab Devalishvilli, the current champion of the 135-pound division, beating Sean O'Malley last time out at UFC Sphere in Vegas. And Umar Nurmagamedov coming off that win against Corey Sandhagen, 18-0, undefeated. The young eagle, same camp as Islam Makhachev, training under Khabib. This is a very, very interesting fight. I mean, when you look at Merab, the current champ, he's a cardio freak. He attempted a record 49 takedowns against PTN, and we'll get to that fight in a second. He did the same thing to Aldo. He obviously dominated Sean O'Malley. When you look at Umar, this is a guy who obviously comes from that heavy Dagestani grappling, wrestling, absolute beast on the ground background. But in that Corey Sandhagen fight, he showed that he's also an elite striker. Now, he's like the next evolution of that camp, right? Because you've obviously got Islam Makhachev. It's kind of an evolution on Khabib. And I think now you're starting to see Umar Nurmagamedov really manifest all of that camp, piecing it together in terms of the way they train their fighters. And, if I look at him and you want me to say other than that Corey Sandhagen fight, which was an absolutely amazing fight. And, Corey Sandhagen, I'm a huge fan of him. And Corey Sandhagen was able to compete in the grappling, and make it and force Umar to stand up with him. Obviously, at which time Umar had to really show he had the skills on the feet, because Corey Sandhagen is absolutely no joke, an absolute assassin on the feet. But his fight against Barcelos, if you look at Umar Nurmagamedov versus Barcelos, he's obviously standing in that southpaw stance, throwing the kicks, and then he just absolutely throws a deadly knee, flies in with the knee into range, and the wherewithal, the style, the muscle memory to throw the knee and then immediately throw the left hook to put Barcelos out cold on his back. Absolutely insane. Hopefully you guys are looking on screen right now about the immense damage this guy can do. But he's absolutely no joke. It's absolutely no joke. And the striking is why many people are thinking Umar Nurmagomedov is going to absolutely wipe the floor with Merab. A lot of people think Merab is the underdog coming into this fight. And when I first heard this matchup take place, I did believe that Umar Nurmagomedov was going to not easily win, but had more pathways to win. That's how I would put it, right? More pathways to win this fight. But if you go watch that Merab versus Piotr Yan fight, the takedowns are ridiculous. Shooting 49 takedowns, absolutely traumatizing Peter Yan in that fight. This is a guy who just has a relentless gas tank. And when we talk about the best cardios in history, I think, Merab Devalishvilli has to be number one on that list, maybe number two, but I would put him up there with the best I've ever seen. Just the way he's so relentless, never looks tired, always has more energy. And you can tell he has so much energy because he always has the wherewithal to fuck with his opponents, right? He's kissing Charlemagne on the back of the neck. He's laughing at Henry Cejudo. He's, doing all of these crazy things. He's shouting at Tim Welch in Sean O'Malley's corner before the fight. He's always got the wherewithal, and a lot of people are so tired that they can't even think about anything else apart from surviving, right? And Merab is just a different machine when it comes to those type of things. But if I think about Merab in terms of this fight, where would I be looking at if I'm Umar Nurmagomedov? I would be looking at that Henry Cejudo fight. Obviously, Henry Cejudo is a bit older, probably came into that fight injured. Wasn't the same Henry Cejudo who was a two-weight world champion. I don't think anybody is saying that. But even then, with all that said, they go for an exchange, right? They both throw. I think Merab tries to jump in with a lead left hook. Henry Cejudo goes to counter that with a right. They both kind of miss. But as Merab is here, kind of all the way in with that sloppy lead left hook, and Henry Cejudo is leaned all the way forward, throwing that right hand. He comes out of the pocket, lands an absolute beast of a left hook that wobbles Merab and kind of shakes him. And, Henry Cejudo didn't do enough, in my opinion, to actually go for it. He's probably worried about his cardio. He didn't want to absolutely empty the tank. So didn't put enough pressure, in my opinion, because having said the fact that Merab did get rocked by Henry Cejudo with a left hook, he also recovered extremely quickly. So I think, Umar Nurmagomedov will be thinking, okay, if he ever closes in range with me, I've got to hit the check left hook or the counter left hook and really try and hurt this guy on the feet. But at the same time, if you look at that fight as it extends with Henry Cejudo, he's able to out-wrestle an Olympic gold medalist. And not just out-wrestle him, embarrass him. At one point, he obviously takes him, picks him up, has him over his shoulder, looks for Mark Zuckerberg, walks across the octagon and slams him on his head. Not on his head, sorry, on his back. Gets on top, starts throwing the ground and pound, and that's towards the end of the fight. And you just saw wow, this guy's really a level above. Then if you are able to out-wrestle Henry Cejudo, pick him up and slam him, treat him like he's a baby, you are an absolute monster, okay? You're an absolute monster. So who do I think is going to win that fight? If you would have asked me 4 hours ago, before I did a bunch of film study and before I listened to other people's opinions and really tried to think about this fight, I would have told you Umar Nurmagomedov will win this fight confidently. 100% of my soul believe that, right? Now it's a lot closer in my mind. I do believe that Merab can do it. Damn. Okay, I'm going to say Umar Nurmagomedov, but I would not be surprised if just the absolute chain wrestling can still take place, because I don't think there's any wrestlers in this division who can just, maybe they can deal with a couple of those shots, but after he's shot on you 15 times, he doesn't get tired and you do. So we'll see, even though it's a hugely close matchup. I'm very, very excited for that co-main event. Let me know what you guys think about that one. Now, to the next fight. This easily could have been a main event on another card. This could have been a co-main event on another card, but it's Jiri Prochazka versus Jamahal Hill. I'm very, very excited for this. When this one, similarly to Umar versus Merab, when this got announced, I thought, okay, now Yuri's going to win this quite easily. But then I thought about it, and I did my study, and I didn't let bias, a lot of memes going on, a lot of criticism going on about Jamahal Hill affect me. You know, a lot of people are making fun of his footwork, and, you know, there's some times where his footwork isn't great, but a lot of the times his footwork is very, very good. He's obviously got that insane KO power, and you look at things like that Johnny Walker KO that I'll put in one of the most viral knockouts we've ever seen in this sport. Lands perfectly on the temple, basically straightens him out, makes him look like he's seen a ghost and flattens him. But obviously that championship winning fight when he won the light heavyweight belt, he is a former world champion. Both of these guys are. But I wanted to start with Jamal. That Glover Teixeira fight, my goodness, in that first round, in that first round, what I noticed is those knees, right? He throws 3 knees in a row, lands 2 to the body and goes for the head on one of them. And that sets a tone, right? If you can dig a knee hard, penetrate your opponent, not throw the knee straight up, throw the knee through your opponent, you've already told him like, yeah, it's going to be a long night for you, right? And then towards the end of that first round, throws 2 head kicks. The first one kind of gets partially blocked and he goes to the head kick straight away. Again, that left high kick hits the glove of Glover Teixeira, but kind of wraps the foot around and wobbles him, goes for to flurry. And, in that fight, it's very clear that you can see that Jamahal Hill has all of the knockout power, the striking ability to knock anybody out. And he did. He absolutely dominated Glover Teixeira. It was one of the most insane fights I've ever seen in terms of viciousness, in terms of blood, in terms of gore, because at the end of that fight, Glover Teixeira didn't even look recognizable, right? This is a guy who can do damage. He's knocked out a lot of people inside the UFC. And obviously, you're coming off that loss against Alex Pereira at UFC 300, came off that Achilles tear. He wasn't going to look like himself. He wasn't going to look like the Jamahal Hill that did that to Glover Teixeira. He wasn't going to look like the Jamahal Hill that can knock anybody out with the flick of a switch. Of course not. But that was just an absolute fight of domination, right? But there are weaknesses. Even though that was an amazing performance in the championship fight, I'll put the screenshot up here. There are moments where Jamahal Hill's footwork is not great. He brings his feet together. He's not rooted to the mat. And if Jiri can time a shot where he's in that position where his feet are kind of on top of each other and he can get in there, he's going to be able to knock out or hurt Jamahal Hill at the very least, because we know the power that Jiri has. Now, similarly with Jiri, this guy was the boogeyman of the division. Nobody wanted to fight him when he fought Dominic Reyes and absolutely killed him with the spinning elbow. Nobody wanted to fight this guy. But then obviously he loses twice to Alex Pereira, obviously with the good Rakic performance in between. And now people are maybe saying he's not as good as they thought, right? He was the next big thing. And against Rakic, after that first loss to Alex Pereira, that knockout loss, he comes in and, Rakic is piecing him up. Rakic is hurting him because Rakic is fighting very disciplined and fighting very, good footwork, strong base, moving around, circling out very well, choosing his shots, keeping himself safe. Jiri, with that weird style, hands down, moving his head, entering range with no defense, is able to make it a war, ends up sparking Rakic out, right? So this is a guy who's an absolute warrior. He's not scared of anything. And when you're talking about these two guys coming together, clashing in the octagon, you're not talking about two absolutely disciplined martial artists when it comes to technique, right? When it comes to fundamentals of the game, you look at someone more like Islam Makhachev. When it comes to Jamahal Hill, he does things slightly unorthodox. When you look at Jiri, he's very unique, very different to everybody else. So it's very exciting and very intriguing for fans and media like me to see who's going to win this fight, because I don't necessarily know. Before, I would have told you Jiri Prochazka. After looking at a lot of tape, I'm leaning towards Jamahal Hill. But this is a guy who obviously got that KO against Rakic, got that war win, last minute clutch win against Glover Teixeira. This is that guy who obviously almost flatlined Dominic Reyes very viciously. It's very, very hard for me to pick this one, but I'm gonna say Jiri Prochazka. Obviously, Jamahal Hill has the ability to KO anybody if he lands. I just think if you can pressure Jamahal Hill up against the fence, make it very chaotic, make it war, do what he did against Rakic, I think he has the ability to win this fight and maybe even knock Jamahal Hill out. But I love both these guys. I'm a huge fan of both of them, and I can see them both winning. Jamahal Hill, for all the shit he gets online, he is an absolute beast, an absolute fighter who, for a lot of reasons, is going to be successful. The way he speaks, the way he presents himself on his show, his communication skills are top notch. So for me, he has a career outside of the UFC waiting for him after he decides to hang it up, which is obviously not anywhere near yet. But that's what I just wanted to say very quick. I'm actually going to jump now to the fight that opens the main card, which is Kevin Holland versus Raina Derrida. And I wanted to mention this one quickly because I think this is very interesting. Obviously, we've seen Reina de Ridder once in the UFC before against GM3 Gerald Mearshart, and it was more competitive than I thought it would be, especially for somebody who's a two-weight world champion at one. But GM3 is no joke, right? GM3 trains at Killcliff, absolute beast of a gym, an absolute veteran inside this game. So it's absolutely no, he's absolutely no joke. And he was able to eventually obviously win with the arm triangle submission in that fight. But I wanted to talk about this fight because I feel like Kevin Holland is severely underrated because he has some losses on his record. People don't understand the elite fighter that this guy is. And he's also very entertaining. He's got, he calls himself Big Mouth, and he's the type of fighter that you need in the UFC. He's absolutely elite and has been there with the best of them. And I just wanted to read quick list I made. Literally, I wrote this list in 5 seconds, right? Of the fights he's been in there with, right? Joaquin Buckley, Roman Dolidze, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Jacare Silva, Hamzat Chimaev, Michael Venom Page, Jack Della Maddalena, Michael Chiesa, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Marvin Vittori, Derek Brunson, and Brendan Allen. That's just to name a few, right? Listen, you know every person on that list. He's got the most UFC experience, or a lot of UFC experience in comparison to Reina de Ridder. And, if I look at him, like, obviously that Stephen Wonderboy fight, it was kind of a gentleman's agreement to not do any takedowns and kind of fight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in his own realm, the kickboxing realm, which is not going to go well for pretty much anybody on this planet. Breaks his hand eventually and is not able to continue. That Roman Dolidze fight obviously hurts his rib, either breaks his rib or rips the cartilage in there, not able to continue. Jacare Silva, what an absolute viral knockout that was. The creativity to knock somebody out from the bottom, from the guard, kind of brings his arm across, knocks Jacare out. I haven't seen a knockout like that since. Joaquin Buckley KO'd him viciously, knocked his mouthpiece flying, sent it flying to the octagon. Obviously gets in there with Hamzat Chimaev on a week's notice or less, maybe a couple days notice. Almost holds his own in that fight. Fights Jack Della Maddalena, beats Chiesa, knocks out Ponzinibbio with an amazing left hand. And we've just seen the performance that Ponzinibbio put on against Carlson Harris. That's a guy who still got it, and he got his lights put out by Kevin Holland. Marvin Vittori, Derek Brunson, Brendan Allen. I mean, these guys, yes, you don't want to be losing, of course. But if you're going to lose, do it to the guys who are at the top of these divisions. And don't forget that he's fighting both at middleweight and welterweight. I think, as a lot of people do, that he should stay at welterweight. He's got more advantages when it comes to his size and his speed at welterweight and his power. But he can also mix it up at middleweight, as he is doing right now with the former middleweight champion of one championship. I'm taking Kevin Holland. I think he's going to be able to knock Kevin de Ridder out. If you look, sorry, I keep saying Kevin, Reina de Ridder. If you see Reina de Ridder's fights, he does back up linear, right? He does come out, leave his chin up in the air. And I think, when you do that with someone like Kevin Holland, who's got those long arms, who can really turn over his punches and extend his arms, he's going to catch you and knock you out, in my opinion. And just to finish up very, very quickly, we've got Beneil Dariush versus Moicano, Renato Moicano. I'm going to start with Beneil Dariush in this analysis. This is a guy who's obviously on a two fight loss streak and 2 bad KOs, but to who? Charles do Bronx Oliveira, former world champion of the lightweight division. Excuse me, one of the greatest fighters we've ever seen at lightweight. Let me have a sip of this Yorkshire tea. And Arman Tsarukyan, who was fighting as a number 1 contender this week in the main event. Now, obviously, it was a bad knockout, especially the Arman Tsarukyan one most recently. But if you look at his fight, you look at that Camacho fight, absolutely brilliant striking there. You look at that Drakkar close fight, absolute demon of a left overhand, also fights southpaw. This is a guy who you really can't count out, and is such an interesting person for Renato Moicano to fight. Such a big test for him because they're similar ages, although everyone says Beneil Dariush looks a lot older than he is. They're so close in age. They're both at similar points in terms of their physical ability, and Renato Moicano has most recently dominated his opponents on the ground, and you can't necessarily do that with Beneil Dariush. He's very, very good at jiu-jitsu, very, very good on the ground. A lot of people thought he'd be a competitive fight for Islam Makhachev when he was on that 9-fight win streak, Beneil Dariush, before those 2 losses. And so this is a very, very interesting fight. I'm very excited to see what can happen here because he does have that absolute vicious ability on the feet. And there's one knockout I cannot remember right now, and I don't know why I didn't write it down, but I'm going to put the screenshots here where he absolutely almost ends somebody. I mean, when this guy throws a full power and he throws those looping overhands, they're so vicious, they can knock people out and just put people to sleep. But when you look at Moicano, this is a guy who, in that fight at UFC 300 against Jalen Turner, gets clipped with the straight left hand, right? Gets dropped. For some reason, Jalen Turner thinks it's a walk-off knockout, doesn't finish the fight, ends up, getting taken down, mounted, and just TKO'd with shots on the full mount. And look at that Benoit Saint-Denis fight. It's similar, right? He's able to use that grappling and that ground and pound, just his intelligence and his ability on the ground to threaten the strikes and beat you up badly. He's a guy that can really hurt you, not just with one punch knockout power, but just slowly take your energy away and just beat you to a pulp. But he's also got power. I mean, I look at that Cub Swanson fight. If you look at earlier in his career, Renato Moicano versus Cub Swanson, he steps in, very exaggerated step in with a jab, drops Cub Swanson, able to cinch up that rear naked choke afterwards. So, you never know with these huge fights. I know it was a bit of a quick analysis. I tried to get through everything there. But for me, this weekend, I'm going to take Beneil Dariush in that fight, the underdog. And you never know. He was obviously spoken about retirement recently, saying, if I'm not who I think I am this next fight, I might retire. So whenever you hear a fighter say that, you do think, if you're not fully invested in this game and you already see a way out for yourself, are you going to be able to perform your best? But I just believe that he's got all the elements. If he has recovered somewhat in terms of his brain, in terms of his ability to take a shot, this is going to be a very, very interesting fight. I want to take Beneil Dariush. So to summarize my picks, I'm taking Islam Makhachev in the main event. I'm taking Umar Nurmagamedov with an asterisk in that co-main event. I'm going to take Jiri Prohaska against Jamahal, Kevin Holland against Derrida, and Beneil Dariush against Money Moicano. And that's been me. I hope everybody has an amazing time watching the fights this weekend. As I said, I'm going to be doing a stream watch along for the fights this weekend. So stay out and look out for that on the channel. It's going to be great. You'll see all my reactions and how nerdy I get when I'm watching the fights. So thank you for all the support on the channel recently. I know this is a relatively short episode and a bit more analysis based, and we don't have a discussion this week, but we are going to get onto those things, especially on Sunday when I release my reactions to the fights. We're also going to talk about a lot of the comments I've been getting, some things that Bobby Winder's been saying, that conversation about unionizing MMA. And, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the standard of refereeing and judging in this sport as well. But thank you so much for watching the Backseat Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Binns. Watch out for this episode on YouTube. Turn your notifications on, all of that good stuff. Follow me on all platforms. And if you're an audio listener, well, I'll lead to Spotify as well. All right. See you later.